What if I told you the moment a coach stops sounding like a leader and starts sounding like a threat, the whole room changes shape? Picture a sideline where the air is thin, voices are tight, and one dropped pass suddenly becomes an axis everyone orbits around. That's the scene we're going to sit inside for a little while because the Giants' decision to fire Brian Daboll didn't come from a single loss. It came from a season of frayed edges and a report that one of those edges snapped loud enough for the whole building to hear. The headline is blunt. Brian Daboll was relieved of his duties after a 2-8 start, ownership saying they'd had enough and naming Mike Kafka the interim head coach. That move itself is the business of consequence. Ownership pulling a cord that changes a franchise's immediate plans. But there's a detail underneath the corporate language that makes the firing feel less like a checkbox and more like a cleanup. An ESPN report that Daboll exploded on Kafka and threatened to strip him of play calling duties after a dropped third down pass by tight end Theo Johnson in a game against the Eagles. It's the kind of anecdote that doesn't just describe a bad mood. It describes a governance problem. When a head coach threatens to demote his offensive coordinator mid-series, allegedly, according to players who spoke to ESPN, the room stops being a team and starts being a theater of fear. ESPN.com. That threat wasn't an isolated weirdness. 2 weeks earlier, Daboll had been fined $100,000 and the Giants themselves fined $200,000 for violating concussion protocol in that same Eagles game, an incident that amplified questions about judgment and control. The league's investigation concluded his actions created the perception of interference with a medical exam. In isolation, fines are business as usual in the NFL. In context, a fined coach simmering sideline blow-ups, lost games, the fine reads like a punctuation mark in a sentence that had been getting more volatile by the week. Reuters, here's why that matters. Coaching is a trust economy. Players buy into a coach's system not because a clipboard is inspiring, but because the coach manages stress, takes blame, and steadies turmoil. When the message from above becomes threats and fines, the currency of trust devalues. Players who used to feel coached begin to feel surveilled. Assistants who once took tactical risks begin to hedge. That's not hypothetical. It's the quiet mechanism of collapse. Giants veterans who watched Daboll's tenure felt the drift for a while. Flashes of competence in 2022, followed by mounting inconsistency, decisions that read as reactive rather than strategic, and a locker room that slowly began to resemble a pressure cooker. ESPN.com, let's zoom into the small moment that reportedly cracked something wide open. Theo Johnson drops a third and long target. A coach loses his temper. A coach threatens to take away play calling. Imagine being Kafka in that instant. The coordinator who'd had play calling pulled before. The assistant who had been publicly second-guessed. You can feel how thin the margin between discipline and humiliation becomes. The story that followed, players speaking to reporters about the outburst, is significant because it makes a private fracture public. Locker room grievances are often whispered. When one gets told to a national beat writer, it's an alarm bell. ESPN.com. Narratively, the firing fits a familiar arc, early acclaim, then erosion. Daboll was once hailed, celebrated even, after guiding the Giants to an unexpected playoff run and earning Coach of the Year. But success in the NFL is a collapsing ledger. You either keep producing results or the applause stops paying the bills. Over time, the formula that works in year one can look hollow by year 4 when injuries pile up, young quarterbacks wobble, and results dry up. Ownership's note about not meeting expectations is corporate, but it's true. The scoreboard had become the loudest conversation in the building. ESPN.com. Now, the franchise is at an inflection point, and Kafka's elevation to interim coach is its first sentence. He's the guy who will call plays against Green Bay this weekend, and the team also announced contingency moves at quarterback. Veteran Jameis Winston is in line to start if rookie Jackson Dart remains in concussion protocol. Kafka's first job is triage, steady the roster, reassure the staff, and deliver a sense of process that doesn't feel punishment-driven. Interim coaches live in an odd temporal state. They must show competence fast enough to stop the downward spin, but not so dramatically that they overpromise what the roster can deliver. Reuters. There's a human angle here that the headlines sometimes miss. Behind the coach's desk is a family, a career, and teammates who shared wins and losses. Daboll's firing isn't just a corporate severance, it's a life disrupted for him, for Kafka, and for a staff that will now learn a new leader midseason. Players who publicly defended Daboll or quietly supported him in texts are now left to process the messy public unspooling of a coach they practiced under every day. And the fans, loud, merciless, and impatient, will use this moment to both demand change and reminisce about the few shiny hours of the past. That swirl is messy, human, and raw. ESPN.com, there's also an organizational question. What does the front office want? Do they chase a clean slate and name a coach who rebuilds from the foundation up? Or do they look for a stabilizer who can salvage a season and preserve assets for a longer-term rebuild? The choice shapes draft philosophies, trade deadlines, and even whether a star player feels tethered to the franchise. Right now, Joe Schoen remains in place to lead the coaching search. Ownership has spoken loudly, but not forever. The next hires will reveal whether the Giants want to be bold or conservative in their reset. ESPN.com, here's the twist most people miss when they chase hot takes. Firings don't always fix the problem. Sometimes they expose the deeper issue. Roster construction, injuries, a missed draft, or a culture that normalized volatility. A coach can go, the structural issues often remain. That means Kafka's true test isn't whether he wins one or two games, it's whether the organization uses this as a moment to repair the fundamentals, medical protocols respected, a clear chain of command, and an honest plan for developing a quarterback rather than swinging at the next shiny thing. So what's the takeaway? When a leader becomes prone to threats and fines, the team begins to fracture quietly, and the public firing becomes the loud punctuation of a longer decline. The Giants' choice to move on from Brian Daboll was both immediate and overdue, depending on which side of the building you sat. Now, the real job begins. Rebuild trust, restore process, and let football be decided by preparation and performance, not by momentary explosions on the sideline. If you want the image to hold, the one that will come back to you in a month when the team is either climbing or cratering, imagine an empty headset on a coach's desk. It's not dramatic, but it's honest. Someone used to lead, and now someone else has to pick up the phone and call the next play. The real question is less about who lost the job and more about who will win the work of putting the Giants back together. Brian Daboll's exit from the New York Giants didn't come with fireworks. It came with a whisper that turned into a story. The coach who once looked like the architect of a franchise turnaround is gone. And a player told ESPN that Daboll exploded and threatened to take play calling away from offensive coordinator Mike Kafka weeks before ownership pulled the plug. Reuters. He wasn't fired for one blown call or one bad quarter. This was cumulative. The Giants are 2-8. They've squandered multiple late leads, and the patience that followed a 2022 rebound evaporated into an 11-game losing streak across 2023-24 and a season that never found traction in 2025. Ownership moved decisively Monday. Daboll relieved of duties, Mike Kafka elevated to interim head coach, and Joe Schoen left to run the search for the next long-term hire. Reuters. The threat detail is the kind of locker room color that changes perceptions fast. ESPN reported that an anonymous player recalled a moment after a crucial drop, tight end Theo Johnson's third down miscue against the Philadelphia Eagles, when Daboll purportedly warned Kafka he could strip him of play calling responsibilities. That detail matters because Daboll had already taken play calling from Kafka at times in 2023 and assumed it full-time for 2024. The report framed the threat as not just a heat-of-the-moment exchange, but as evidence of an internal trust fracture. ESPN.com. The Giants' ownership, however, did not paint the breakup as purely personal theater. In a brief statement, John Mara and Steve Tisch cited results and the direction of our franchise as the reason for the change, while praising Daboll's contributions and keeping general manager Joe Schoen in place to lead football operations. That's a classic front office message. Don't burn bridges, but signal a new chapter. Still, whether the decision was driven more by wins and losses or internal dysfunction is now the debate that will define the narrative. Reuters. Let's be concrete about why this stings. Daboll came in with pedigree. He'd helped turn around Buffalo and was the 2022 Coach of the Year, and he arrived in New York with a clear mandate: fix the quarterback room, rejuvenate the roster, and restore credibility. For a hot minute, he did. But the film tells a harsher story the past 2 seasons: collapsing leads, special teams meltdowns, inconsistent offense, and a franchise that's oscillated between hope and frustration. In that context, a coach who loses the locker room or appears to micromanage his coordinators becomes a lightning rod. The Washington Post. On the human side, Kafka's promotion is revealing. He's now the man tasked with steadying a 2-8 ship and getting the most out of rookie Jackson Dart, a roster with evident talent but thin margins, and a fan base fast running out of patience. Kafka inherits play-calling authority and the impossible job of turning around performance midseason. Not a job you take when you expect things to be smooth. The optics of promoting the coordinator who was allegedly in Daboll's crosshairs make for a messy postscript. Giants.com accountability will be the currency in New York from here on out. Ownership has punted the wait longer argument and signaled a reset. For players and assistants, that means either buy in fast or become part of the next staff's cleanup. For fans, it means another search and another set of decisions that will either return the Giants to relevance or confirm that the franchise is still circling its own tail. Reuters' coaching firings are often messy when reported in real time because the truth sits somewhere between play-by-play frustration and long-term organizational failure. The ESPN detail about the alleged threat won't by itself explain the whole story, but it does reveal the stress points: a coach under pressure, a coordinator who may or may not have felt undermined, and a locker room watching the slow erosion of trust. Whether that anecdote is a symptom or a cause is the kind of question executives will parse in interviews and in film rooms over the next few weeks.